Stephen, thanks for your time.
So
you have a unique perspective. You covered the court as a reporter.
I did.
What is that like?
I always thought of it as one of the highest callings in journalism, which is why I said when they asked if I would do it, of course I would. It's a really different kind of job than other jobs that I've had where your primary sources on the beat are not the people who you cover. The justices don't have a whole lot of contact with the press. You see them in court, you read their writings, their dissents, their opinions, things like that, but it's not like you really get to know them unless you're there a really long time.
Do you get some contact? Any type of like behind the scenes, off the record contact?
Sometimes. I mean, they won't talk to you about the court off the record, but they will talk to you about their lives. Justice Scalia liked to go to lunch with members of the press every once in a while and talk about growing up in New York, for instance. Or I have a friend who went to a Catholic school like his, and he was fine to talk about that. But they don't talk about their work with the press a whole lot.
Did you get a chance to have some one-on-one conversations with him?
Yeah, I've seen Justice Scalia at parties and talked to him there and things like that. They're really interesting. I mean, the one thing I always said was the justices are the smartest people I've ever met or ever had anything to do with. I mean, these are people who are thinking about the law in a way that will blow your mind in a very short period of time in a conversation with them, and that's all of them. I mean, I disagreed vehemently with Justice Scalia on almost everything he wrote, but any time you talk to him, you really got a sense of how deeply he thought about these things, how much he knew about them, and how quickly he could sort of assemble different pieces of information together to come up with insight into things, and they're all like that.
So being a reporter, was he welcoming to conversation like that?
He didn't love it, no. Most of them have a pretty arm's length relationship with most of the press. The Chief Justice would have lunch with us once a year because he felt like he had to. A couple other justices would do that, but for the most part, they keep to themselves and their clerks.
Sure. Going forward, okay. Everyone's looking towards the election. Everyone's looking past Justice Scalia now as his family mourns him. I'm thinking that perhaps he's probably already ruled on some things in the pipeline, isn't it? Couldn't that be the case on inside?
Sure, it's possible. The court is on right now what we always refer to as like the second winter break. Right after the January sitting, they would go away again for about 4 weeks. That's why I think he was on his this trip in at a ranch in Texas. So they wouldn't necessarily be writing right now. I don't think that would have been the case, but there could be rulings from cases heard in the fall term, the fall term of this term, that are sitting around that he started writing and hasn't finished. There certainly could be dissents or concurrences that he was working on, and all of that stuff I think just goes away.
His vote would go away.
His vote goes away. His anything he had to say about the case would go away, and it's just the 8 remaining who will rule from now on.
I didn't think of that. Okay, so it could go away, will not stick, his vote then.
No, I don't think, unless there is a finished opinion of his sitting around, that will be the last. That'll be the last thing. Whatever opinion the last one we have will be the last one we get.
Now we've got a defining focus, defining point for the presidential election. Do you think this will be the thing that both sides will focus on?
I think they will very intently, and I think there are risks on both sides. I think if you're the Democrats, of course, you want the president to nominate somebody. You want that person to get a hearing on the Hill, and hopefully you want the Republicans to vote for them. If you're a Republican, you probably don't want that, but there's real political risk in not doing it, right? There's a real political risk in appearing to hold up the court and its business with politics. There's a real problem in saying that a president who was elected twice by a majority of the people somehow loses a constitutional obligation that he has in the last 12 months of his. That's almost a quarter of his term. That you're saying somehow he can't appoint a Supreme Court justice. That could play badly for Republicans in November, not just in terms of the presidential race, but in terms of the Senate. If they lose control of the Senate and the White House, you will get a much further to the left nominee in the early part of next year than you probably would get from Barack Obama now.
And think about that, because Mitch McConnell already said the next president should pick this next justice. But who's the president that's been assigning district court level judges?
Right.
It's the President Obama.
Yeah.
So if the Republicans want to delay this, a lot of the rulings will come from more liberal justices at the district level.
Well, I mean, not only that, but this idea, again, Mitch McConnell voted for Tony Kennedy to go on the court in 1988. That was a presidential year. I'm not sure he holds a lot of credibility now saying that Barack Obama can't do it. I mean, this is politics, and it's not supposed to interfere with the judiciary to this point. I mean, the whole idea of lifetime appointments, in fact, was put into the Constitution to inoculate the judiciary from some of the political buffeting that you see in the other branches. So there's a real risk in the Republicans pushing that too hard here and having there be a backlash.
Now, you wrote a column this morning that was insightful because you were there. You covered this man, Justice Scalia, and you covered the court. Mm-hmm. It was also provocative because on the other side, you would have people that appreciated Justice Scalia's attachment to the Constitution and not seeing the Constitution as a living document.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll ever see a justice like Scalia again?
I think it would be very hard to replicate. Number one, I mean, the intellect and the combination of intellect, writing skill, and thought. I mean, this really was a pioneer in that way of thinking of the Constitution and the law. I don't know that you'll see another person quite like that. Now, of course, he's got lots of progeny running around courts and in law schools and things like that. But there will never be another Justice Scalia. At the same time, he had such an influence on the court and on the law generally that the legacy that he leaves will be with us for a long time. This very restrictive view of the liberties guaranteed by the Constitution. He believed that they were restricted and that lots of people were left out of them. That's a battle we are still having 30 years after he was appointed to the court, and we're going to have it for a lot longer. A lot of the discussion around the next nominee for the court will be about that very question.